Today we're fortunate to have four thought leaders, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 leaders to talk about this subject with me. Yeah, 1, 2, I kind of right, yeah. Yeah, I'm not the thought leader, you guys are. So here we have Francis Berwa, Head of Investments at zkPass. We have Matt Sorg, VP of Technology at Solana Foundation, Larry Pang, Head of Ecosystem at IoTeX, and Al, CEO of Koi. Oh, and of course, Ralph, Head of Communications at Rival Networks. So why don't we start off? You guys can go through and just introduce yourselves one by one, please. Start with Ralph.
Yeah, hi guys. I work at Communications and Strategy at Rivals, and we are building a small summary, right? Yeah, so we're building an infrastructure network for handling proprietary data sets when it pertains to AI. So anything to do with storage, access, security, and monetization of that data, essentially.
Very cool. Larry.
Guys, my name is Larry, Head of Business Development at IoTeX. IoTeX is a base layer for DePIN, Decentralized Physical Infrastructure Networks. You may have heard about from the previous panel. For us, verifiable and decentralized computing is really important because smart devices generate tons of data. The raw data itself needs to be transformed into proofs that blockchains can ingest into their smart contracts and distribute tokens to the device owners for performing activities in the real world. So excited to chat more about that on the panel.
Hey everyone, Al from Koi. If you don't know about Koi, we just hit 73,000 nodes, which is pretty awesome. We now have a whole bunch of awesome ecosystem projects building on top of this. The main differentiator for Koi is that we're probably the easiest developer environment to get into. You can write code in any language and deploy it out to these 73,000 home computers. And we've built some really interesting sharding mechanisms to make that extremely easy for you from start to finish. And the cool thing that we're announcing over the next couple of weeks is that you're going to start being able to actually issue your own token directly to any of these node operators. You don't have to buy like Filecoin.
Hi, everyone. My name is Francis Berwa. I head the investment of zkPass, and we are an oracle for private data verification. Essentially, what we do is verify and validate any data on the internet. That's basically it.
And Matt, I do tech things at Solana Foundation, and we are the kind of facilitative entity for Solana, which is a general purpose L1.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Okay, let's kick it off with describing decentralized computing in a simple way. So I'll let somebody take it if you want, and then we'll have everybody, I think, respond to how it will impact the blockchain industry. So does anyone want to take that question?
I can try this one. This is the thing that we figured out. So you have to be able to trust the computer without actually knowing who they are. And that's the really hard part. The lucky thing for you is that people have been thinking about this since 2016, and there's all kinds of standards out there, and you just have to tap into one of those existing incentive mechanisms and then optimize it for your use case. And it's actually a lot easier than it sounds.
Distributed networks, basically nodes, right? So for us, we look at it as a way to disintermediate, basically, and making sure that there is scarcity as well as distributed reward system.
Good explanation. Cool. Go ahead.
I mean, I think there's a lot of ways of going about it. Sometimes you try to make sure that there's a consensus algorithm between them, so there's an agreement. Other times you have some sort of certification, either some sort of centralized verification or some sort of zk proof that you did the thing correctly. So I think there's just really understanding your exact use case and what kind of technology stack will need it.
Okay, and then tug on that thread. So how will this impact blockchain?
I think the thing that you're seeing is a lot of different like modules, if you will, like the different types of orchestrations for it. Similar to like if I go on to AWS today, I have different, very specific services for compute. I don't just have EC2. I have different boxes I can choose. I have different Lambda functions or different ways of doing it that meet my application and can customized. So I think you're starting to see that similar type of thing arriving in blockchain. And that's when you start getting competitive against the other solutions is when, you have these hyper optimized things for your use case.
That's great.
I think like from a layer one blockchain perspective, like all layer ones are kind of distributed computing networks themselves, right? But verifying the transactions that are submitted to a blockchain. When we think about bringing real world data to a blockchain, there's another layer of computing that needs to happen, right? So if you have want to verify that automobile produced the right amount of data or a certain type of data or a weather station or a GPU actually performed the job that it was meant to do in the real world, you also need some type of parallel processing or distributed computing in order to verify that what happened in the real world actually happened before settling that insight, the blockchain to trigger smart contract. And so it's kind of like a hierarchy. In the DePIN space, devices with on-chain identity will generate some type of data. That data needs to be sequenced and made available and stored and then computed over. So all of these kind of layers transform the data in a way that is kind of prepping it to be settled to a chain, right? So I think it's kind of interesting to think about off-chain computing, and we're all familiar with the on-chain computing aspect, which is ensuring that a smart contract did the right thing that it was supposed to do, and the right actions were handled after the case, right? But also the same thing has to happen for kind of this oracle concept of bringing real-world data on-chain.
So then let me talk on that. So is it true then that as we add layers in blockchain networks and for compute, that we need more compartmentalized compute? You need to be trusting more compute resources. Is that kind of the way it goes? It'll scale. We have to trust it more. That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of like a L2 type of narrative also, like the transactions on an L2 like Optimism or Arbitrum, right? You're basically processing transactions off of the layer one and netting the results and then settling that to the layer one to avoid congesting the layer one with all these transactions and wasting gas fees. So a very similar concept in DePIN. You don't want to submit all your device data to a layer one blockchain because it's slow and expensive and not as fast to create these proofs. Yeah, I think that's kind of an analogy, right? Layer two also has to have consensus about the transaction before it's settled down to the layer one. And maybe there's other layers that need to exist as well to make sure, everyone agrees that the truth is the truth.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit on that because I mean it's very much the case that today in our niche space of blockchain, but across cycle over multiple cycles, we've tried to keep onboarding the Web2 space, right? Other companies, their own data stacks, their own full stacks of whatever they have developed, and a lot of times that is centralized, right? But the decentralized network approach, I mean, it's been around for a while, right? I mean, P2P, IoT, everything that has been done before and tinkered with in the past in their own little, niches, we've kind of adopted as our own and rebranded it, but it's coming in the sense that that blockchain infra that we've been working on and honing over the last decade or so, there will come a time, and it's coming, right? That at the edges, we're already getting more and more connected on the Oracle data side, the data layer side, AI side, SocialFi, everything that's happening. A lot of it is still using classical cloud computing or classical server infrastructure. And I think it's more and more getting blended into what we're doing here with our consensus mechanisms, with everything that we've worked in terms of cryptography, the advent of and the importance of privacy with data. There's a lot of cryptography there. There's a lot of stuff that we've been working on, a collective, right, in our space that is going to be more and more important with all these systems that we want to integrate with. So just want to add that.
Is it still that like 2/3 of the industry still rely on AWS or some centralized?
I think it's something crazy like that. Yeah, there's so much potential to just bridge it all on a very intuitive fashion, right?
Agreed.
On the note of AWS, there's one really important thing to consider here, which is like, if you have a token and your token is selling, your token foundation or whoever has to sell the token in order to pay AWS in cash, that's a massive drain on your tokenomics. It's like the worst case scenario for a token or an IoT system or any of these DePINs over time is that you have to keep selling and selling and selling to store all that information. So the best case scenario that you can imagine is, especially even layer one blockchains have this problem, right? Like you have mining infrastructure where you have to pay for the mining infrastructure, you have to pay for the electricity, and you have to sell the tokens that you're mining in order to pay for this. And it creates these sell-off cycles. And we've been seeing this as far back as like 2010, 2015. All of the original blockchains have this problem. Someone at the end of the day has to pay for hardware. And if you can pay for that hardware in your token and the person who receives that actually wants to hold your token, then you have this great interchange where your tokenomics actually accelerate instead of decelerating. It takes the friction out of the whole system.
So I just want to add something that's a bit contrarian to what everybody's saying, which I agree with you all, but there's still a little bit of a limitation in scalability whenever I think about the distributed computing and then we compare it to the traditional actual industry. Because sure, it's great to have everybody sort of participate, but when we talk to enterprise clients, like big clients, there's a big limitation on that, right? Transaction will become slower, the speed will become slower. So in this case, maybe this is something you guys can chime in because obviously we only deal with private data as an oracle, but enterprise clients and distributed computing is a little bit like we're not there yet, right? So even though I'm on this side, I still want to say that there's limitations. Thing.
Well, that's a great lead into the next question, which is limitations. So,
Right.
Yeah.
I think there's some acute things that blockchain does really well, like settlement and other things. Like a lot of places will take some efficiency on hardware and insert trust in some, trust in the entity that's hosting that single node, or even like places like payments and wire transfers, like paper faxing and stuff like that. That's why there's many days in between. So blockchains, just because it's code and it's verifiable, it's more or less instant in comparison. And so it does those things acutely well. And so trying to find, but one of the aspects is just finding the cases where that is incredibly important and very high value for whatever that use case is. On the other side of it, yeah, there's certainly some overhead when you have to do orchestration and you don't have any assumptions of trust. In fact, you assume there's adversarial situations. That adds some extra burden somewhere, right? And I think that just comes down to a lot of the stuff he said earlier around like there's known ways of combat that with certain trade-offs. And so I think one of the main things is just really understanding your use case. What is the configuration that attacks like a real user problem at the end of the day? Try not to think too much about some sort of deflationary tokenomics, blah, 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 blah. Like what does my user actually want? And yeah, try to figure out how to like deliver to them.
Is there a sweet spot use case that comes to mind right now?
I mean, for us, I think like Visa, Stripe, PayPal. There's a lot of wanting to get rid of SWIFT and have more efficient payment rails internationally. Like that's a huge cost to all these incredibly big payment providers. Visa's doing merchant settlement. ISD is trying to get USD exposure around the world. A bunch of other like financial applications all around are using are planning on using PyUSD to give their users exposure to US dollar in places that they can't really get it now. It's actually really hard for most continents to actually get exposure to USDs, especially with any sort of yield. Infrastructure, exactly the conversation. But I think that's like a very clear one that just uses the tenants. You have a bunch of nodes that are verifying this thing and everybody can see it, and even large institutions can understand that is very secure. And there'd have to be some significant financial ramifications if there's a significant enough adversarial situation in order for that to not work, especially on Solana, which has I think something like $60 billion in economic security. So so anyway, I think there's that. I think on like something that's a little bit closer to this, I think there's a lot of just nameable problems. Like machine learning is incredibly expensive, both in inference and in training. I think there's problems like that are just very, very, very known. And there's also some problems to solve it in this decentralized way. You have to handle big jobs if you're going to do the training side. So these are all the things that you have to like really think through in your app. Like, okay, here's the known problem. Here's the trade-offs when you're doing it in a decentralized way. Can we find a configuration that actually solves it?
I like what he said, except for getting rid of Swift, because I feel like that Swift is never going to go anywhere, even though we would like to do that. I really agree with you, but it's more of trying to figure out how to, I guess, get them on board on this side, however that might look like. Which I don't know if that's going to work. Yeah, you're right. For me, I'm going to go with security as far as part of it is the pain point is going to be privacy and security, because we're dealing with private data, and when you distribute a lot of this information across nodes and networks, you also have that issue, which is, how do you actually keep some information fully sensitive? And a lot of people here touched on it a little bit, but there's a lot of different sort of options. Like if you're using something like homomorphic encryption, but that's too expensive, too early, not ready. And then we talk about ZK, which is obviously what we're looking at. But yeah, I think it's picking exactly if some companies, and my example earlier was because we have talked to enterprises and then they bring these questions up to us. Hey, look, our clients' data is important. Would love to have it distributed, but is this the right play for us, right? Or when it comes down to the hosting or things of that nature. So these are things we have to ponder as companies that are in this space, and how do we help them understand and navigate this while still giving them the ability to stay compliant and not worry that something might happen just because they're thinking about innovating that they might regret later. So.
Yeah, decentralization definitely has its trade-offs, right? Like there's a big modularity and composability narrative, or not narrative, but desire, which benefits developers greatly because they have more flexible options. But for the end user, it's probably going to worsen the user experience. It's going to make things a little bit slower because each of these new modular layers needs its own set of validators to reach consensus on, is this data sequenced correctly? Is it the DA layer, correct? Is the long-term storage layer correct? Is the off-chain computing layer correct? So all of these kind of handoffs versus you have one monolith that does all of the above and verifies that the end result, like the input matches the output, right? So the trade-off is definitely time and money, I guess. But it's tricky. Like I feel like as a D app, agreed that you need to really choose at what point decentralization matters, right? A lot of people are running everything in a cloud and just settling it to a blockchain. So it's a mix of centralized and decentralized, but running on a decentralized blockchain. So it's fully decentralized, but that's not the case, right? Like achieving a fully decentralized, doesn't touch cloud at all type of use case. I'm not sure if there's much maybe like outside of DeFi that really does that today. But even with DeFi, like getting the price of a security, like RWAs are kind of hot right now, but understanding what, the T-bill rate is and updating that in a efficient fashion. So, downstream, nothing goes wrong. It's an extra layer of complexity and an extra layer of overhead, as we were talking, right?
That's a really good point. So where do you see the incentives for driving retail users from centralized to decentralized?
I used to be a consultant before I joined crypto, and working with these big Fortune 500 companies on modernizing their tech stacks. No one does shit until a regulator tells them that they have to, right? So compliance is probably the only reason why people will chase upgrading their tech stacks to something that's more complex, not for the sake of earning money or not for the sake of user experience, right? Maybe there will be one day when decentralized systems are the norm, and the government will require everyone to adopt fully decentralized tech stacks, and that mandate or the expectation from users that, hey, I'm not going to use your system unless it's fully decentralized, that's going to be the catalyst. But in no way are we there today. Users don't care today. But I think more mature DApps that have the time to think about this, they've grown their communities, they've established their tokenomics, they've reached some type of equilibrium in their network. What else do they have to work on? Let's decentralize our tech stack to make kind of lead the industry and drive that change forward. But it's definitely not priority 1, 2, or 3 for a brand new application to think about, in my opinion. Right.
Great, Ralph, you have thoughts?
Yeah, I was just gonna add a bit of a contrarian view, maybe a little different, but I think what we're going through is what Bitcoin has gone through in its first few years. And that whole conversation of decentralization versus centralization and all those limitations and everything that's kind of putting the brakes on its development and its adoption. I think ultimately it will come down to adoption and communicating whatever we all here agree on and to everyone else over and over and over again from generation to generation. I mean, even something like right now, where you see, for example, a lot of apps these days are getting rewritten from scratch because of what ChatGPT has been able to and agents have been able to give us in terms of power to develop and the creativity it opens up in each and every one of us. A lot of apps are getting rewritten, whether that's CRM, whether that's big database systems that get rewritten for 20% of the cost of what it took to write them and maintain them up until now, but maybe 80% of its feature set, right? And apps like that, if we communicate properly and in a very passionate way that we've been doing, that our predecessors have been doing, those apps will be built in a decentralized way, because we all kind of intuitively and a primal level agree that that's the way we should do it. Especially when personal data comes into play, when sensitive data comes into play, medical information, everything that we really take for granted that these companies have custody over. At some point, there's going to be new builders coming into play, people like us, our age, that will build those systems, and we will be building them with them, right?
There's like this revolutionary spirit at play. I think you're right.
Yeah, and I think it's something that we've all been promoting and kind of bathing in it nonstop, constantly, over and over again. And we were met with those frustrations when we try an app that we like, a Netflix or an Amazon. They always do something from a centralized point of view. They kind of shove their opinions around and try to force them down our throats in specific aspects. Pick your poison, right? We've dealt with many clients before, right? Many subcontractors, and everybody has their own tech stack, their own centralized way of doing things and whatnot. But I think it's about just delivering and communicating that passion and those central ideas that have rocketed Bitcoin, of all things, in the face of immense scrutiny. And at this point, I mean, we can be proud of what we've achieved, I think. But in a way, also, we're getting back to what you said, is we're always in a constant state of flux. This is all a sandbox, right? Anything we do in 4 years is not going to be there. It's going to be different, right? New considerations, new incentive structures, new players, new tech. And as long as we have that dynamic spirit of always constantly reading up on everything, doing our research, doing the science, I think we'll get there.
Can I share a little fear that I have with every topic that we talk about here, and decentralization and everything is, I don't know if you guys saw, Microsoft had announced something that they will be ready at the version by 2029, which is the quantum side, right? And let's be honest, people talk about it and it's just like a topic that gets thrown in there. But to me, it's real, because I kind of get into these rabbit holes of reading certain topics. And to be very frank, everything could be reversed because it's transactions. So think of, and Vitalik did a paper like 2 months ago that was about the way to solve quantum, but I didn't really think it was insightful as much. But the key here was like everything we're doing and we're talking about can be reversed unless we start thinking about even just resisting that quantum resistance. And that's kind of like rewriting almost every freaking blockchain. And who's going to do that? Like, anyways, just shared my fear with you guys. So,
is there a better capacity than in decentralized?
Quantum,
no.
I mean, asymmetric cryptography is a fundamental thing of the internet. I mean, and even our HTTPS is on that. So, I mean, there's research being done, and there's plenty of quantum resistant signing mechanisms. I don't get me wrong. There's going to be some disruption, and we have to figure it out. But it's not like an insurmountable problem. If it becomes a situation where there's a security risk, it's an easy enough thing. I mean, at some level, there's a reason why you can come to consensus and around some change, right? Like there's a EIP process on Ethereum, there's a CMD process on Solana, and we would just change the underlying cryptography and do some translation of their current EDSA address or their current SVM address or EVM address, and then you would change over to the quantum resistant one. And it would be disruption. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it totally, but like these things are very, like, this is code. You can have a translation mechanism from one to the other, and when you have years in advance, hopefully we can figure it out. And again, the entire internet is going to have to figure this out, because that's the way almost all of our certs are signed on the internet.
Yeah, start the poly market prediction market 2030.
I'm sorry. Get into that.
Hedge against the industry, but the problem is the hedge here doesn't really work because poly market itself will fail.
Poly market for the
House of Sand. I don't want to move on without Al getting your input on incentives driving to decentralized.
So just back to this quantum thing, actually, though, the thing is really, and like we're very safe because we use the SVM. So our L1's secured by whatever you guys do, and I trust that you're going to figure it out. So good luck. More broadly, though, the thing about this is quantum can crack one key at a time. So you go and spend $1 trillion on a quantum computer, and you can crack one Bitcoin wallet a week. And then like next week you crack a different one and another one, and like these things are not going to be widespread for a while.
It just creates constrained problems. So you can take one thing and constrain it down from like what is some arbitrary number of things to like 10,000, and then you can brute force that. So it's not like these aren't like silver bullets that just like fundamentally destroy everything instantly.
There's one broader solution to this, which is you just need a lot of keys involved in your system, right?
Yeah,
So if you want to have a social network or like a banking system or something, you don't want like 50 keys on the multisig, you want like 50 million.
Right.
And then it's impossible to crack it even if you have a quantum computer. And it doesn't matter how good the quantum computer is because you need as many of them as you have users in your system then. Which there's not going to be that many quantum computers. That'd be very, very difficult. Unless some like alien comes from space and gives us a quantum computer. We'll see.
Alien table space chain announced today on the channel.
All right, Al, did you want to comment on how Koi thinks about building incentives to drive decentralized compute on the user side?
So we see the opposite thing. I think maybe a little contrarian, but everybody here has talked about B2B applications. I don't actually think most of the world is going to adopt this for like the enterprise use cases for a while. The thing we have noticed though is outside of like the English speaking world, there's a lot of people who are kind of resentful of the current internet because it was made for a certain population with a certain culture. And frankly, it's like a giant bleed on the rest of the economy to send money to California. And that actually doesn't suit most of the world. And like at this point, there's a lot of really strong software developers all over the world who would love to have their own social network, their own streaming website. And they're very happy to download Netflix and then rehost it and put ads on it. Like they're going to do that. Somebody's definitely going to do that in the next 10 years. And that's going to be the most widespread way of viewing most of this content. And decentralization is good enough that like a lot of this stuff is going to happen really, really, really fast soon. We see that being the real use case, and there's a lot of value drivers there.
Is that like the 2002 version of like the street markets with like the DVDs bootstrap? Like
that is exactly what I think. Pirate Bay coming back. LimeWire,
everyone.
I mean, LimeWire has their own token now, right?
Yeah, that's true. That is very true. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, let's shift into the policy shift that we've seen around crypto over the last few weeks in the U.S. specifically. How do you guys see this potentially boosting or affecting decentralized compute in any way?
Well, I like that it sets a framework that basically opens doors to potential regulations. As long as there's clear regulations, I think people will find a way to innovate much more safer and kind of like without having to worry whether they're breaking some sort of law. So it really helps to a degree. I don't know how long it would take, but yeah, I think that's one angle. GDPR and the data for us is key. So we do not access or store people's data for the sake that, just for that fact that there's always data compliance is coming out. So we let users, for example, store their data locally on their own browser, and we don't necessarily touch it or access it. And we use partners when it comes down to what options we give users to store. So for us, we're very careful when it comes down to regulations because obviously any partner that uses us kind of might become complacent if we don't follow regulations on our side. But yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Not an expert in this, but like, has anyone seen like a technologist testify before Congress? Like, it's painful to watch. Like everyone has their own opinion on TikTok being in the U.S., but like the guy was badgered about like Wi-Fi connecting to phones, and you can't really rely on politicians, I think, to save us, right? GDPR and like CCPA themselves have helped, like, but there's always loopholes to it, right? Like, pay the fine. More like a financial calculation than like let's actually protect our users' data. So I always think like laws are promises, but code is law, right? And maybe that's the catalyst to really build these decentralized systems. Maybe we don't see the burdens of it by living in the States, but I think other countries probably feel it a lot more. Maybe out-of-body experience for them.
Awesome. One further thought on that is that cryptography used to be illegal. So you used to not be able to have asymmetric key cryptography because it was considered military technology. So this whole conversation about quantum, like the thing is, actually for the economy to be secure, now cryptography has to be widespread. And so there's a much wider revolution happening outside of just crypto where we actually need people to be more decentralized, or some state agent is going to start hacking everybody. And we need to give people privacy because otherwise their privacy is a giant honeypot. And then when that thing gets hacked, then everyone gets compromised. And like, that senator who can't understand how Wi-Fi works, now their nudes are online. That's not good, right? Nobody wants that to happen. So they're going to support this as much as they can, I think.
I mean, even Apple's using pass keys. That is asymmetric cryptography. I mean, the world is going more and more towards asymmetric cryptography, which is just like super bullish crypto, because that's what the whole thing's built on.
That's awesome.
I guess I can just add, personally, I'm a little skeptical with when government is getting into regulating our space a little too fast, just because any changes that they would need to implement over time as our tech stack changes, it's also going to take a lot of time. So like, for example, even stuff like the GDPR data that you mentioned, let's say they do accept it in an encrypted fashion, but then we change those rules by implementing FHE, where we can actually manipulate that data, but they don't really get it. They just see, okay, someone's not going to touch that data. That is not that person or whoever has custody over that data. So then you're going to go through another logging, however many months or years of depositions, of expert opinions, of papers getting written, of back and forth, of lobbying. And so I hope they let us break as many things as possible and we keep building and doing our thing. I'm still always and always will be skeptical of the US government, especially meddling with all of this, especially considering the world is very much global. And like you mentioned or alluded to, that it's not only the English internet that uses these things. There's a lot out there that we have no exposure to. And I hope that we can keep building.
Oh, go ahead.
I was actually in DC last Thursday talking to a bunch of politicians. It was an amazing day. Vouch. Anyway, but I actually think, potentially contrarian view, that I think they're very well-meaning and very smart people on the whole. Like, they could be being paid way more than they currently are. They're legitimately trying in a lot of cases. It's just hard when you're trying in like these two-party systems, and you're trying to act on behalf of an entire nation of 300 some million people. Like it can just be really hard. And and everything is evolving very quickly. So you don't want to put something in the law knowing that it's really hard to pass any law whatsoever, that the system is just a little bit stagnant and broken right now. I think the result of this still is awful, to be clear. Like, that's why I kind of scoffed at what you said, is because like it's totally real. Like the fact that we don't have regulatory clarity is one of the biggest hindrances. I think you said it really well on our industry right now. But I think it's like, I think we can operate a little bit more confidently now based on some of the things coming out, that as long as we are well-meaning and not scammers and stuff like that, we are going to get more and more clarity over the next 5 years. And I just think actually taking the time to continue the conversation with your politician and the United States is government is actually going to be really beneficial. And then like the complete opposite end of that spectrum, the other thing you said is also completely true. They are seeing there's so much competition in the world. Like US is just going to fail if they don't wake up and create good environments, because everybody's just going to move to all the other countries that are way more friendly to these things. And the economy is just going to be way more efficient on crypto rails. So they just got to react.
Yeah, maybe the answer is like AI, right? Because I've never seen, not to just insert buzzword in, but like maybe I've never seen like both sides of the aisle like sound the alarm more than like the dangers of AGI, right? Like if we don't trust AI, and if AI powers everything, then we're fucked, right? So having AI run on blockchain rails may be the catalyst to decentralize other parts, right? Because decentralizing money is not really the use case that's driven very meaningful regulation or very meaningful policies. But if AI is looming, and who knows what Ilya saw, like we got to trust AI like very, very quickly, right? Hashtag word.
I just want to say, I wasn't laughing at his answer. I was laughing because in my mind, I thought he meant like, oh, let the AI be the leader kind of thing. So that's why it was kind of wild thought. But yeah, because Yeah.
Larry brought something up that I want to use to go into the next part, which is there are mainstream pressing problems that are dominating headlines that if we can solve here, can slingshot builders into mainstream adoption. And one of those is data privacy. The other is the problem of AI. Can decentralized compute actually boost data privacy for individual users?
Yes. It really should. I mean, it really, really should. So the thing with data privacy is like, okay, you use Signal, right? But you send your message from your IP address to your friend's IP address. And that's where the quantum computer can actually intercept that message, break your encryption. So your best solution to that is to have lots of relay nodes and not to have a single database. It's the honeypot solution, right? You can encrypt the data as much as you want, but if you store it all in one place, then that's the target. And that's where a lot of these solutions should work. Homomorphic encryption, I'm not sure if it's really, I don't know if that's real yet. I think there's a lot of PhDs talking about it. But the solution here is really like spread the system out, try to get lots of different people building solutions progressively better, and have a competitive market for privacy. Because right now we don't have a competitive market for privacy. We just give Google all of our data, and then they use it to make whatever that AI thing that they have that doesn't work is.
And by the way, the homomorphic is just theoretical. I don't even know if it's actually going to happen, right? Because
Hey,
sorry,
I let one slip. I can't let another one go. My network is an FHE project. That's fine.
there you go.
We'll talk afterward.
I'm making enemies on this panel today. Yeah. Just gonna be quiet.
Actually, that's a good point, though. What our colleague here said is if you decentralize whatever you decentralize, you're basically inviting the market to just work its way through and just capitalism work its way through, right? Exactly. If you have the right incentives, then they should just win out, right, over the centralized solutions that are either grandfathered in or have been there for a long time, and at some point will get deprecated. But yeah, I think it's just that trend of, I think that's part of, actually that's part of the piece that I was missing about my understanding of
Money talks. Money always talks. That's what it takes.
I think it depends. So to answer the question you mentioned, I think it depends on the data. Like I mentioned earlier, not everyone is going to want their data to be in a like distributed computation. And that's fair. It doesn't mean everyone has to shift, right? The beauty of innovation is that, you give additional options and things of that nature. So I think it would depend on the data, because some data I can imagine won't necessarily benefit from that kind of approach. Like some, there's chains that give you their own private, right? Like options like Avalanche or something like that. So some enterprises choose to do that for their own purposes. So just putting it out there that yes, privacy is a big deal when it comes down to computation, but I think it depends on the data that we're talking about when we talk about privacy with it.
Good distinction.
Yeah, for privacy, I think the model that makes the most sense, and maybe it's ready, is like the federated model, where you're not giving your data to anybody, but you're running algorithms locally where the data is hosted. So you don't bring the data to the code, you bring the code to the data. Maybe not like a decentralized computing, but like a distributed computing. And also, I feel like we could come full circle. Like everything used to be on-prem, then it went to the cloud, and now everything's going back to the edge. So we're computing more locally and not giving the entirety of data to big cloud operators. That seems like the right data privacy solution to me. And maybe blockchain has a angle there. I'm not sure.
Can I say AI?
Yeah.
So Llama and other models are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And so you actually can bring the compute to the data. And you can keep your private data, or you can store your private data encrypted somewhere, like double, triple encrypt it, and retrieve it, run a sequence over it, and then re-encrypt the result. And you can personally keep your own little mini cloud. Better yet, you can have your friend's cloud. I know you. I think I would probably trust you to hold some kind of an encrypted process for me. I give you the data, you run the thing, you give me back the result. Maybe you have a GPU. I don't know. Maybe we don't need it. Yeah, paying people, but it should happen. It should be peer-to-peer, right?
And then Larry, so yeah, distributed versus decentralized. Would this be a distributed use case?
Basically.
But you'll still need to verify the authenticity and accuracy, because just because you trust him, tomorrow he could be broke and needs to make money and tells you false information.
Okay, I get to show the reputation thing.
This
is cool.
You need zkPass.
The thing that we've been thinking about. Yeah, so actually zkPass, right. So
Come on, I'm here, guys.
we left this topic earlier, but there's this thing about compute efficiency, right? So if I need to do 2 + 2 and I need to do it decentralized, that means that every 100 addition repetitions that I do, I have to check it, right? So then you have to do it too. And then occasionally we have a dispute and you say I'm wrong, and then you have to do it too. And if that happens too often, we have to do it a bunch of times. And so right now, ZK compute is like 10 times as resource intensive as it is to just do the compute one time. And so you need 10 times the computing, which is never going to happen for enterprise use cases, right? But if you have reputation, you can select somebody to resolve a dispute, and you can select an auditor with greater efficiency. And so you have less disputes and less issues overall.
Yeah, that's just what I was getting at earlier when you have like different configurations. Sometimes, yeah, it's like similar to the way that blockchains do it with redundancy, or you have some sort of like subsampling or whatever. You can just have these like dispute resolution mechanics, and you don't have to go to fully ZK every single time. Sometimes you should, but yeah, no.
I think that's the only way that we actually eventually get to something that's resource intensive to like a similar level to traditional use cases, right?
Yeah, like to give a more formal thing, like in machine learning, you, especially on the training side, you do like a state update, and you can parallelize that, and it can be very noisy because one state update can use different updates and like some parallel process that's doing another state update. You don't necessarily care because it's all probabilistic anyway, and so you just have to understand, like, if that's like the case, then you don't necessarily care exactly about like some exactly precision on one thing. You're fine handling some loss. You just don't want to pay some bad actor too much money. So you just have to make sure they're not like off the rails. So you don't necessarily have to do fully ZK in that case.
And then the point of the blockchain, back to your question, is where do you keep the registry of all the known actors who are reliable to reduce all these replications? Because the replication factor in your computing is really what's going to drive like all the resource intensive stuff, and that's what drives up your costs.
Great point. I tried to not go into AI. You guys just insisted, so we had to go there. I'm kidding. That was part of the question. So did we flesh that out thoroughly? Do you guys think any other comments about decentralized compute and AI and ML use cases versus centralized compute? Inherent advantages over centralized competitors? Any thoughts there?
You can train your models on a lot more data that you wouldn't otherwise be able to access because GDPR makes it illegal.
So decentralized data aggregation. Cool.
Well, and collection.
And what?
And collection. Like so on Solana, there's Grass, there's Hive Mapper, there's a bunch of ways that you can just there's a bunch of these ways where you just have like individuals being able to collect data or serve different ways of doing data scraping and stuff. And he even talked about like, Twitter is notoriously like really raised their rates on their APIs. But if you have somebody storing and indexing it themselves, I mean, you can start having all these things like stored on edge and formats that are much simpler than the centralized solutions are willing or able to offer.
And just giving people the ability to have the choice themselves of what they actually want to disclose and so forth, because it's their data. I mean, that's the most important thing. It's like everything we're talking about and everything we do is data, but we're talking about private data mainly, not public, right? So even if you just have an email and a password, it's considered private data, no matter what website you go to. So if your data, if you know that you have all of this data as, you know, your identity and the score, you mentioned score, I like that because we love that. Then, you know, the key point is, what if now I have a choice whether I want to monetize or depending on what I want to share, because I feel like that's really the key reason we're talking about all of this, because people are tired of their data being shared and all that. It's, yeah, anyways, I can talk about this all day, so I'm just gonna.
Yeah, in the DePIN context, I think for me, there's like two holy grail use cases that we're kind of far from. Like one is more about like a single device that can contribute to multiple protocols. So like a single device can mine multiple tokens at the same time. With a lot of these like edge computing servers that can run 8 virtual machines, maybe we'll see that, but maybe a little bit more near term. Like the ultimate long term holy grail use case is like smart devices generate data, blockchain adds trust to that data, AI extracts insights and value from that data. So if you pump all the world's data through these decentralized layers to establish some type of trust and maybe like a data primitive, then mixing and matching data from different verticals, like how the weather impacts renewable energy production, impacts how many miles is driven, is really like an on-chain collective intelligence of the world, where anyone that contributes to it will benefit from people querying it, right? But long journey to get there. Maybe after all this stuff that we're talking about, but one
Next bull market.
maybe. No,
Actually,
probably not.
I like that cross-pollination of different industries, right? I think that's really a big unlock for all of these innovations, actually.
I actually think that's just like a basic definition of why we're here. I mean, right now, how much of the world's map data is just controlled by Google. And you have 100 PMs that control all of our movement information. And so I think it'd be great if that was just on more open systems and anybody could figure out how to use it for some entrepreneurial use case.
Actually, you said next bull cycle. The thing to note on this is this will probably trigger the next bull cycle.
Yeah,
because this is an internal marketplace in the decentralized world, and that's what's going to drive the transaction volume. That's going to actually lead to the appreciation of these tokens because of real world AI use cases that actually generate revenue, which maybe, and if it does, it's going up.
That's awesome. Okay, look, let's do final question. I want to talk to you guys. I want to ask you, looking at decentralized compute, what products are you looking at next? What development do you want to see? Projects, feel free to shill. What are you looking at? Start with you. Francis, you've been really fast on your feet. You want to kick it off?
So I want to see the whole internet brought onto the DePIN ecosystem. And basically, that's going to unlock a lot of whether it's decentralized computing or distributed computing in this manner. And I think we'll be able to have a lot more options, both as people and enterprises. So not necessarily like a specific industry, because it could be weather, as he mentioned. It could be automotive, as the previous panel that was here. It could be almost anything, because, yeah.
So actually, Matt, last time we talked, you asked me why we were forking Solana and why we wouldn't just do it on Solana. And I guess the actual short answer to that is we wanted to be a transaction fee layer to connect all these devices together and create a market. And we think that that's compatible and like useful for everybody else as well. But the cool thing about that is that we get to mint our own token, and we're in L1, so the valuation is going to be pretty good. And so we're dedicating 50% of the token supply to grants for people who want to build these kinds of like peer-to-peer applications that don't necessarily need to put everything on chain, but any of those transaction fees on Koi kind of lead back to being able to incentivize all these people. So we just announced that we're giving away like 50% of the token supply to developers as grants and initiatives over the next 5 years. And the things we're giving them away for are like decentralized social, decentralized VPNs, decentralized data mining, stealing Netflix, stealing Spotify, all that stuff. Anything that you want to do with all of these devices, you can just go and
turn off the cameras. Don't record this.
Yeah, not legal advice, not legal. Advice.
So any project that are vampire attacking Web 2. It's like,
we're giving away like $80 million to vampire attack Web 2.
You're making a lot more enemies than I did on this panel.
Larry?
Yeah, I mean, IoTeX, I think we have like 4 core products. One is DID-based identity for devices. Another is we have this thing called IoConnect. It's like an embedded SDK to equip devices with crypto packages, cryptography packages they need to communicate with Web3 systems. And we have a layer 1 blockchain, and we also have WebStream, which is a off-chain computing layer designed for DePIN. And it's, the next version of WebStream is going to be incorporating zk. So working with RISC-0 to allow people to generate proofs of real-world activity using real-world data and settling to any blockchain. We love people to settle to IoTeX, but trying to design this off-chain computing layer to be multi-chain also. So settle to Solana, settle to Polygon, settle to mostly the EVM chains and Solana. But yeah, that's my interesting IoTeX.
I love it. It's interesting you're not partnering with zkPass for your zk solution.
I know.
I had to get you back.
Thank you. Thank you. I was going to say something after the panel, but it's okay. Larry and I are friends.
Yesterday, we're gonna work together on something.
There you go.
Yeah, for sure.
Love it. I love it. All right, guys, we have a few left. Are there any questions for any of the panelists today about this topic or related topics? Yes, go ahead.
Hey, Francis. Hey, Al. With WorldCoin using biometrics, right? With this decentralized ID or with establishing an authentication for your world ID to be able to act within AGI. Do you see that as problematic, or what's the workaround here?
Workaround.
Insofar as there are hundreds of DID products that are in the market. WorldCoin uses biometrics, iris scans, fingerprints, which I don't see as a path forward personally, to be able to turn over your personal biometrics in the true ethos of what is Web3. what is the next step? How do you autonomize?
See a couple of plays that are okay. I mean, I agree with you that that is a fairly invasive and doesn't seem to scale to everybody kind of solution. I think there's other ones that if they can make work, I think are kind of interesting. There's people that are doing like kind of like 3D images of your hand, and then because it's like motion based and everything, it's kind of hard to replicate across any individual. You can't just take a picture of somebody else's hand and replicate it. You have to kind of do it real time. You could do it with like some reasonable probability that it wouldn't be able to be hacked. I think those are like, maybe I'll take a step back. The core premise here is like simple AGI and recognizing what is a human versus what is some just like artificially generated thing is going to be a real problem. I mean, it's already becoming a real problem. So that's the original premise of WorldCoin. I think the original premise is sound, that we need to figure out a way to understand if it's a real human that actually has some representation of themselves hosting anything like soon. And so I think that is realistic. I think the solutions and all the mechanics of doing that are important to solve. I agree that I don't know if WorldCoin is it, but I think I'm actually pretty confident that like, with some of the stuff I've seen that there's some paths forward there.
Hey, first of all, I never heard about the one in the hand. I got to ask you about that. That's weird, but cool.
It's cool because you just do it with a cell phone camera. You don't have to do it with a special device. And do it, yeah.
Someone can just replicate your hand, but yes, you're right.
So the way it works is that you would have a random thing of motion it would tell you to do at any given time. So a combination of that motion and like the thing you have to do, you have to like make a signal and whatever in 3D. So it's like hard to like replicate that with some. Yeah.
Got you. I'm also on the same page. I don't think that's the answer, even though I know those guys they're pretty smart people, and at least the technology behind it. But it's not my cup of tea either. For us, we took the concept of proof of humanity as in, what if we give you an ability to verify everything that you have, that only you have access to provide that you are human without having to give like the biometric aspect of things. So for us, we actually do proof of humanity. We could do anything from account based to basically anything that you own or you have. And the Sybil resistance part of that is if someone logs in or if you log in again, it negates the old one. So it's always basically a new one. So that's our approach. I don't think you should give up something that you can never retract back unless, especially if it's stored somewhere in I'm not a super like anti-systems, but I do think there's certain limits in invasion where I can choose to give information or extract information at will, because a company may change its ethos or its direction. Google used to be a different model, right? So if I don't agree with it, I should have the ability to retract, right, what I provided, because that is my information. So that's our solution.
Coin Network has one of the most robust node networks by and large.
You got a fan.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So yeah. Oh, I am a fan. Do you see the decentralized ID playing a part in that authentication, that autonomy with moving forward? Also, in addition to let's say AI generative or agentic agents, not just for representation within the blockchain.
Yeah. Thank you. Awesome. Yeah, I do actually. So DIDs, I think, are absolutely the solution to this. You can do any number of like biometric things you want, but what you can't replace is a person saying this is a real person. And that's actually like at the core of it, these cryptographic proofs like that can actually really create a strong identity. And I think what we're going to see in the future is not that there's like a distinction between AI agents and people, but that there's a gradient of reputation at the top of which is humans. And then things down below that, there's stuff down here that we're not really sure about. And the way that you distinguish the things on that in that gradient is by how many DID attestations you actually have. And the things at the top are the actual humans that have created like connections between each other. And the good thing about doing it this way is that if an AI agent is detected in this pool, you can vote them out the same way that you audit a compute cycle. And you can say, this one's AI. And then you can trace that all the way up. And anybody who gave an attestation to the AI is dumb. And we just vote them all down. And they have lower reputation from now on. Which I call RASCR, which I just made up, but it's retroactive Sybil key revocation, I guess. Yeah, I just made that up.
It'll stick. I feel like everything is vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
Bitcoin private key can be hacked. It takes I don't know, fucking long time, many, many years. But it's kind of like this concept of defense in layers, right? You want to add 2FA, 3FA, 4FA, 5FA in order to make it harder to crack something. Maybe there's biometrics and this web of trust and a private key involved. And, this basically how security systems are built today. It's like layers upon layers of security, right? DID is huge, but in gun to your head, would you, verify that someone else was a human? Maybe, sourcing all these verifiable credentials to attach to your DID will require the DMV and the government and all these people to issue credentials on chain. So yeah, I think all of these are part of the solution. I don't hate WorldCoin. I think they open source their hardware, but even secure hardware is vulnerable with side channel attacks and everything, right? Like SGX gets hacked all the time. So it's really stacking all these mechanisms together is the answer for now.
That was a great question. Anyone else? Yep.
Hey guys, Has here from Drive. Quick question from our side. What are your thoughts of decentralized ride-sharing protocols, and how could they work with what you're building?
Decentralized.
What for here?
Did you
Can you repeat that?
Oh, ride share.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts of decentralized ride-sharing protocols, and how could they work with what you're building?
I just took teleport here, which I thought was pretty funny. I think, I don't know, a gig economy, I think a DePIN kind of, getting people to, more efficient payment rails and incentivizing things. Rideshare is originally, you were going to take a ride share. You were going to take the ride anyway, and so might as well get people with you. And then they just figured out that actually was just really good monetization. So they just made it into essentially taxi. And I think you're going to see more and more applications like that just get people to incentivize people to do things that are productive for other people. And I don't know. It's kind of hard to compete with an existing market. I think I'm a little bit more bullish on the ones that are doing something completely net new. But I do think there's enough inefficiencies in the way that the current rideshare applications work that there's something there.
Yeah, I feel like people that give rides are always going to have problems, right? Putting peer-to-peer ride sharing and ride hailing on a blockchain, I think makes a lot of sense. But what happens if you need this? You forget your phone in the car, or so your Uber driver does something really nasty, right? There's no remediation that comes with the Uber fees. Like all the fees that they have are charging you for the overhead of providing you a safe ride, right? I think once you eliminate the human aspect, and I'm really excited for this Tesla robotaxi thing, because if you have trusted machines that can deliver rides verifiably without any human intervention, we're talking about a robotic sharing economy that's run on smart contracts, has a lot of legs, right? But we'll see.
What if to use that network, that blockchain rideshare, everyone had to be stakers and you got slashed for unethical behavior?
That's a good protection for sure. Yeah.
You went the enterprise route again. I love the idea of just taking the margin out of it and using it to give the drivers a better experience. Because right now Uber's getting this giant margin, and realistically they don't need. That's a protocol. It's a protocol with an app, and it doesn't need to be something where there's a margin. So all you need to do is take the margin out of that and put it towards health insurance for all the drivers. And you get instant adoption in every country where Uber exists, and you cut them out of the market completely, and all their drivers switch to your platform.
And I like what you just said. And I like what you just said, because I'm a fan of any vampire attack on Web 2, because I think there's a way to innovate Web 2. And part of it is Uber never started with such a high fees. He's right. The fees are necessary, but they've gone overboard. I don't know if you guys ever have conversations with your Uber drivers. I'm a 5-star Uber person, so I do that. But
Humble brag.
Prove it.
I had to shield my yeah. But anyway, they're definitely not all of them are fans of the fees. I mean, but they have to do it because you're right. He mentioned earlier, this was a fantastic innovation and idea. So, but within that, there's also more innovation that can happen. And if you find a way to eliminate some of those kind of potential pain points, then I think you have a pretty good project.
All right. That's a good wrap. Sorry, guys. We went over a little bit, but want to thank you all for being here. Matt, Francis, Al, Larry, Ralph, thank you so much. That was super thoughtful.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.